to different people? We'll take a look at that. And this, the Justice Secretary has ordered a review into controversial court bail rules that prioritise ethnic minority suspects. This is Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, told MPs she won't allow equality before the law to be compromised. It follows criticism from Robert Jenrick over guidance urging judges to consider an offender's culture when deciding bail. So we've had some interesting sentencing issues. This is in addition, as I understand it, to that. Let's get a word on this and some clarity, perhaps. Daw KC, barrister, writer and broadcaster, is back with us. Out of court, it's a rarity these days, Chris. You're a busy man. Good afternoon.
I'm sorry, Ian. I miss you. It's been a while since we down in your lovely warm studio, and someone made me a delicious cup of tea before we came on here.
I know, those days are long gone, but I hope we can rekindle this, like almost a new Netflix show starting. You know, we can bring it together and have the joyous attention of a gripped nation as we reconvene. What about this story then? Look, I know you've got views on the sort of racial bias, I think you've called it in the past, in the justice system. As I understand it, and I'm going to put it in its crudest terms here, somebody's working out bail conditions for a suspect, ethnic minority suspect, happens to be a black kid. They can consider what? The slavery? What's the deal here?
No, it's not that at all. I think it's important to kind of separate out two issues, really. The first issue is that there is absolutely no doubt that you are overwhelmingly more likely to be stopped by the police, searched by the police, arrested by the police, charged by the CPS, convicted in court and sent to prison if you're black. That's a statistical fact, and it's overwhelmingly the case. Many, many times more likely to suffer any one of those things just because you're black. Not because you're somehow more criminal, but just because you're black. And people often don't fully necessarily grapple with why that is. And the reason is because overwhelmingly densely populated areas, which were densely populated with people from ethnic minorities, are in urban environments. They're in East London, for example, or other parts of London. They're in certain parts of Manchester, certain parts of Birmingham, very, very heavy ethnic minority populations. And in those areas, there is much more intensive on-the-street policing than there is in areas which are predominantly white areas, like, for example, where I live, which is a relatively small country village, which, frankly, has a very low ethnic minority population. And I don't think I've seen a policeman in about 4 years around here. So the chances, if one of my kids is walking around, I'm not saying they do this, but if they're walking along smoking a spliff, or if one of them happens to sell some weed to one of their mates, the chances of any white kids ever really getting into trouble with the law are very small, because there aren't really police around watching them in those communities.
So it's not a bias then? It's not a, it's good, accurate coppering, policing?
No, it is a bias if you think about it, because if you're a 16 or 17-year-old black lad in Hackney, the chances of you being stopped for doing exactly the same thing that a 16-year-old is doing in Cheshire or Buckinghamshire are 7, 8 or 10 times higher, purely because there's a higher police presence.
But there should be a higher police presence in the other places. So Hackney have got it right. It's not an anti-black or an anti-ethnic minority position.
They haven't got it right, Ian. This is the problem.
More coppers on the street catching criminals. That's right, surely.
No, it's not. Just think about what I've just said. If you're a 16-year-old white lad who grows up in a middle-class area and goes to a predominantly white school, you might smoke weed, you might do all exactly the same things that the black lads are doing in Hackney. The difference is you'll never get arrested because there's no police to arrest you, and also because you've probably got other social props in place and money in place to try and make the problem.
But that's an argument for more police, isn't it, in those areas?
It's not an argument.
It's not an argument for less police in the other areas.
No, it's not. It's an argument for not over-criminalising one group, predominantly young, predominantly ethnic minority people, and not criminalising the other. I'm not saying you should criminalise most of the things that young black lads are pulled over for, arrested for, stopped for, are nonsense. And most of them don't have anything on them. The problem is when you over-criminalise over generations, one group of people or one group section of society, in this case, those from ethnic minorities, you end up with this vast disparity in outcomes where sort of half the prison population are from ethnic minorities in some prisons, and yet only 3.5% or 4% of the general population are black.
I mean, that could be, you could extrapolate various things from that, couldn't you? I mean, there is an argument that I've always thought that, you know, poverty and class play a huge factor in this, not just somebody's colour. You're right about the numbers. They're there for all to see. But the story behind it, I think, is more nuanced than perhaps you're telling us here, Chris. I mean, if this is about people who live in tough, rough areas, there will be some white families in those areas. They will also be susceptible and subject to those same issues.
Now you've hit the nail on the head, because that's exactly what doesn't happen. Because what happens is, if you're, as I had a client who was a black bank manager, very successful young black manager, driving a very nice car. He got stopped in London, driving around London, roughly twice a week. Eventually, he was arrested twice and accused of having a gun when he didn't have one, and he had to end up suing the police. If you're a white doctor, Ian, driving the same car, same exact locations, you'll never get pulled over.
But is that an issue about looking at other forms of criminality? And again, I don't think it's because somebody has black skin, they're somehow born to carry out more crimes. I mean, that's just a stupid argument. But there is such a sense of being part of an ethnic group where, for many reasons, you are disproportionately represented in criminal statistics. Not all of those people will be, but some of them will be. And that's just a fact, isn't it? Now, that could be gang culture would be an obvious one, right? Loads of black gangs, right. You don't have the same problem with white gangs. So you would naturally, in those areas, be looking at young black kids, hence a disproportionate amount of young black kids getting pulled over, and the knock-on effect.
We didn't. You remember? You've forgotten what I've just said. I've just said the same exact person, but one's got black skin and one's got white skin, yes, gets a different treatment by the police, and that doesn't just apply to your black doctor driving around London in his BMW. That applies to a young black lad on his way to college with his books in his backpack, doing nothing wrong. A white lad in a posh area is never going to get stopped for the police.
But that's because there's not enough. That comes back to that, doesn't it? There's two separate arguments there. In terms of this bail thing, considering an offender's sort of bail conditions, considering an offender's culture, what do you take that to mean, Chris?
Well, I mean, it almost doesn't make any sense to me at all to talk about considering culture, because culture isn't really the issue. The principal issue here is race. It comes down to this. As I've said already, you are vastly more criminalised and brought into the criminal justice system just because of the colour of your skin. So when it comes to bail, it's absolutely true that black people are much more likely to be refused bail for the same crime with the same criminal record than white people. Why is that? Is it because individual judges or magistrates are racist? Probably not. It's simply because there is a cultural bias in favour of criminalising certain communities and certain races over others. And it's understandable that that cultural bias is here and that racist kind of preference and bias is in place. It's understandable that that happens, and that's why you need rules that say, let's look at this carefully and make sure we are taking full account of the individual circumstances and not just ticking a box of sending yet another black.
You know, Chris, I mean, maybe as a defence lawyer you might resist this analysis, but when I speak to police officers, they are often scared witless to go into areas where there's young ethnic minority, young black boys in particular, but other ethnic minorities, because they sense, hang on a sec, I know I've got body-worn camera on me, I know there's CCTV everywhere, but I'm going to be accused of being a racist. The irredeemable reality, however, is that in this area, areas of North London, you mentioned East London as well, where you've got just by dint of fact, gang culture, knife crime, perpetrator black, victim black, by a country mile. So we know, and within that gang culture, we've also got drug-related offences and some sexual offences too. That completely overshadows anything of its equivalence in the peer group of other ethnicities. Now, if that is the case, well, it's not nonsense. Were you telling me
it's nonsense? Okay. You're saying that black gangs overshadow white gangs. I don't know if you know anything about 100% justice system. But Ian, come on! I've been a criminal law for 32 years. The gangs that I have seen operated by white people operate in exactly the same way as those operated by any other race. The difference is, if you're a black drug dealer, you're much more likely to get arrested than if you're
also much more likely to use a knife and be on the recipient of a knife. Yes, you are. Look at the stats, Chris. Are you telling me there aren't more young black kids die by the blade than there are white kids? Are you seriously telling me, as an experienced lawyer of 3 decades, you can't believe that? It's not true.
If you have a statistic to tell me, Give me a statistic rather than just a loud, shouty argument.
It's not a shouty argument. I'm not shouting.
What's the number then?
What's the number? It's not a shouty argument.
Give me the number.
Cressida Dick at the last Home Affairs Select Committee.
How many black people are killed by black-on-black violence against white people being killed by white people? I'll guarantee you, more white people are killed by white people than black people are killed by black people. That is a fact.
Right. Young black kids, knife crime in London.
Okay, so now we're just focusing on young black kids.
Well, when I talk about kids, I'm talking about teenagers.
We're going to demonise young black people now.
I'm talking about dead. I'm talking about dead kids here, not demonising.
You are demonising the black community by making the point that somehow that's to do with race as opposed to it's an urban environment.
No, it's to do with gang culture. That's my point. It's not to do
whether it's white, black, or brown.
It's to do with the nature of that gang culture in that area.
It's to do with the fact that it's an urban environment.
Okay, I'll find you the last set of numbers, because they do change from year to year. I will find those numbers and I'll broadcast them in terms of young kids dying of knife crime in London.
White murders versus black-on-black murders.
Yeah.
See, because you were suggesting that black people are getting killed by their own in much greater numbers.
Correct.
That is not true.
That is
Unless
true.
you pick a very small subset. If you go to Guadalajara in Mexico, do you think the gang violence is black-on-black there? No, of course it's not. It's Hispanic on Hispanic, because that's the urban environment. That's the nature of the environment. If you go to Chicago, there are black gangs, there are white gangs, there are Hispanic gangs. It's nothing to do with race.
So you are
urban gang environment.
Chris, so when I find the specific figure for the latest data, which is likely to be for 2024, and there's 70 kids dead who were stabbed, usually in the streets, often in broad daylight, you are satisfied that there will be an equal proportion of white victims as there are black victims?
I'm not suggesting that at all, because
that's kind of what you said.
No, it wasn't what I said. What I said was, you will find in any equivalent urban environment, you will find the same rates of murder and crime all over the world. It doesn't matter about race. It matters about the urban environment. And overwhelmingly, the black population in this country is focused and mostly lives, not all, but mostly lives in urban environments.
Yeah, I agree. It isn't because somebody's born black. I agree with you. There's no gene that makes you a stabber or a murderer. I understand that completely. But there can be an environment, there can be circumstances. That could be gang related, it could be poverty connected, it could be all of those things. All I know, Chris, is that without a shadow of a doubt, you and I can walk into Paddy Power or William Hill tomorrow, and it will be an unsavory bet to have, but I can tell you now, you will find more young black kids dying at the hands of other young black kids, usually connected to gang culture, than you would white kids. In other areas of crime, you'll find, look, football hooliganism, you'll find more white guys. I get that.
To be fair, you'll also find more white women being murdered by white men than you'll find black women being murdered by black men. If you pick a particular cohort, obviously it's different. It depends where they live.
But it's about proportions, isn't it?
The majority of violent crime in this country is committed by white people.
Okay.
That's a fact. So let's just take race.
As a proportion of the population.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But the chances of a white person being brought to justice, being taken to court and prosecuted for exactly the same thing are a fraction of the chances of it happening.
So when the Home Office tell us the latest stats show that foreign criminals, Afghans, Albanians in particular, Eritreans, are more likely, 18 times more likely to commit a sexual offence than an indigenous person in this country, you would refute that as well?
I totally would refute that. It's ridiculous.
Why have the Home Office said it?
Because the Home Office statistics are nonsense. They do not bear any relation to reality. Do you really think that all the unreported, unresolved sexual offences, of which there are tens and tens of thousands in this country, do you really think there's any reliable statistic that suggests that one group of people, a small number of people, by the way, are statistically somehow more likely to be sex offenders just because of their culture or their background or their race? It's just rubbish.
Well, not your race, but maybe your culture.
It's rubbish, Ian. It's utter rubbish.
On that point, Chris, it's always good locking horns with Daw KC, the barrister, writer and broadcaster. Thank you to him. I think there's going to be some fairly strong response on that. I can almost hear the stats flying into our social media box. Your response is 87222 if you're messaging, 0344 499 991 1000 if you're on the blower.